Okay, let's talk about the difference between primary and secondary sources quickly. And then we'll have some work on it. So, as we were just talking about, a primary source is different than a secondary source because a primary source is something that is written or created at the time of an event. So something that was created at the time of an event might be a diary or a newspaper article, or today we would use a video recording or piece of art, something that was created at the time of the event by somebody who was experiencing it somehow. And again, it could be an eyewitness account, could be an interview with somebody, could be letters, tools, artifacts. So in this case, we have letters, written pieces. Could be an art piece, could be an interview, could be a diary, but it also could be a tool or an artifact, meaning something that was created or built or something with art at the time, maybe painted, maybe sculpted, or built to use at that time. And a primary source has the benefit of being a source directly from that event, maybe a poster that was held during a specific protest or a march, something from that event. On the opposite side, we have a secondary source, and a secondary source are those things that are created or written after the event. This one says written, but it could be something that's created. It could be a video or a movie about this time period. In order to make that, you have to research primary sources so that you know what to put in this movie, what to put in this video, or a documentary using clips. It might use primary sources to create itself, but it's not a primary source by itself. It becomes a secondary source because it's created after the fact. And the author or the creator of it is relying on other information. That person's going to research, but they're still putting their own thoughts in it as they create that. This includes textbooks. All the textbooks that you might have had in classrooms about history or science, those are secondary sources. Information that someone else has researched, created an idea about, and then written down and passed on to you. Secondary sources, reference material, editorials, opinion pieces. Has the benefit of having time to understand. Think about how different someone's interpretation of an event is 100 or 200 years later. When we think about the pieces of slavery that we look at today, we might look at diary entries from slaves, or we might look at art created about slavery at the time of the triangular trade. Those pieces might have seemed normal at the time, but we have different interpretation or different understanding of it 200, 300 years later when we talk about equality or acceptance of differences or civil rights issues. So we have the benefit of time where we can look back on something and go, what have we learned since this period? We're not in the middle of it. Primary sources and secondary sources both have value, but you need to be able to recognize the two, when to use the two, and what these benefits are of each. So we are going to be looking at these today in the other document that is called Primary and Secondary Sources. Here are some examples, as you can see on the pictures. We have a video interview, we have a news article, we have a diary. Here we have books created about history. Here we have a Newsweek article. This one could be a little bit of primary and secondary, depends. If there's an interview with someone in here from that week, it's probably primary. If it looks back on other things, where somebody has researched something that happened in the past, then maybe it's secondary. So we're going to move down and do this activity called identifying primary and secondary sources together. So it has the notes of the information about primary source and secondary source here to remind you. Let's look at number 1. A play showing how Benjamin Franklin flew a kite during a lightning storm. Okay, show me on your hands. Primary or secondary? You choose. Show me what you have here. Okay, I'm seeing mostly secondary. So we have a secondary. You can write it up there, or you can just write it next to it. It's fine. Because this is information from somewhere else or by a person who is not directly involved. We don't have Benjamin Franklin coming here to tell us this story. We don't have a written account or his diary entry from it. We have researched it and created a play about it. So this is secondary information, even though the information might be based on real fact. a short story describing Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla's electrical battle. Who was doing what first? What do you think? Primary? Secondary? Show me on your hands. Okay, so we have, again, a secondary source. These people are not here to tell us about this. And unless this story was written by them, making it an autobiography of something, it's not a source directly from that event. We might have used primary sources and researched it to create this, but this story is a secondary source. Number 3, Anne Frank's diary describing her life during World War II. Primary, secondary. Show me on your fingers. Okay, good. We have our very first primary source, meaning it came directly from somebody, not from somewhere else, directly from somebody who was there and witnessing it at the time of the event. So we're going to go through the rest of these and see if you can figure out what they are, primary or secondary, since we're going to be looking at some today and identifying some. I'm going to let you guys do this at your tables if you want to work with a partner, or you can work with a group. If you have 4 people, you need to split it into 2s. If you have 3 people, you can work either individually or together. It's up to you. Okay, so just quickly review. After we read this under our primary and secondary sources about Saint Domingue in modern Haiti, we have, it's a secondary source because it was not written at the time of the event or by somebody who visited there. This was written in 1999. We know that they might have used some primary sources, but this is a secondary source. Which groups of people are involved? Europeans, they are the buyers or consumers. Haitians, they are the slaves. What's being traded? These 5 things listed in the bottom. Coffee, cotton, indigo, sugar, cacao. What was indigo again?
Dye.
A dye, like a bluish purple dye. And who benefited? The Europeans had plantation workers, which we call slaves, and the Europeans traded those raw materials that the slaves farmed. So they had slaves doing all of this work for them that they stole, the slave catchers stole, they brought them to this part. And then, not only were they working for free, but then the Europeans benefited because they would sell or trade those raw materials.
How did they make indigo?
It comes from plants, and to be honest, I actually believe that indigo might be made with ammonia that is, I think you mix the plant with water, ammonia, and something else. Ammonia comes from urine. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I think there's something to it with that. And then they put it in a big tub that kind of looks like what we call a hot tub today. Like a big, have you guys seen wooden hot tubs?
Like the thing for
And
grapes.
then, yeah, like the thing for grapes. And then they let it soak, and they let it soak, and they use that to dye clothes, sheets, cloth on furniture, anything like that. Yeah. And that's, we still do those processes today. They're just done by machines. Yeah. Okay. So, number 1, we finished number 1. Let's look at number 2. Okay, so number 2 on this document talks about cotton. Okay, so we're going to read this one aloud. When I pause, you will fill in the blanks, and then we'll go over the chart together. Be ready to fill in. Here we go. Professor David Richardson has discussed how slavery was necessary for British. Good word. Of course, the huge profits made because of slaves who worked on plantations provided lots of money needed for the rapid industrial growth that took place in
Britain.
For the northwest of England, there was a development even more important than the growth of
Sugar.
plantations. This was the growth of slave labor
Cotton.
plantations in the American South. There was a rapid expansion of cotton production after the invention of Eli Whitney's cotton
Gin.
in 1793. Now, this word right here is gin. You guys might have heard it. It's not the alcohol that you're talking about that you might have heard in the past. A cotton gin was the first machine that helped take cotton and pull parts of it apart so that they could use it as a raw material. Because I don't know if you guys know this, cotton comes on a little, yeah, like a plant, and it's like this sort of, with these branches, and it grows like this around it. So you have to pick it all apart and pull out these branches. What?
The cotton comes like in a pom-pom.
Yeah, like that kind of. Not as pretty, right? But because these are all in it, so you pull the cotton out around it. So this cotton gin helped to work through this cotton process, and they needed slaves also to pull pieces out of it. Let's continue reading. This expansion allowed the development of a new industrial economy throughout Britain. The growth in the number of
Slaves.
the southern states of America the growth in the number of slaves in the southern states of America from less than 500,000 in 1789 to nearly 4 million in 1860 shows how important the transatlantic cotton trade was to those states. So, folks, in less than 100 years, and remember, this is not when we had a lot of medicine. So the fact that the population grew so much, even though people died during this process, is from 500,000, 500,000 to 4 million. I mean, that's like more than double, more than triple, more than quadrupled. It's exponentially larger. Britain was the most important international consumer or buyer of American. Whoa, let's try again. Britain was the most important international consumer or buyer of American.
Cotton.
By 1860, over 88% of the cotton imported into Britain came from the labor of enslaved Africans in.
American.
You guys awake today?
No.
Factory owners and merchants in England were part of the reason that the system of slavery in the American South lasted so.
Long.
What does that mean? They were part of the reason it lasted so long. Diego.
Because they were selling the cotton.
Remember we talked about being a responsible consumer? How we talked the other day about companies should not make products in plastic that can't be even recycled. They shouldn't do that. But what would keep them from doing that?
You not buying.
Right. They're going to continue to do it as long as
You buy it.
people buy it, which is the exact same thing that happened here. They continued slavery in America because Europe and England, specifically in this case, wanted to buy it. Excuse me. So as long as there were buyers, they were going to keep doing it, no problem. Well, we would stop, but they want our stuff, so we'll just continue. What if England had said, we don't want any of that? We would have stopped. Okay? English merchants made big profits because of exploited laborers at home and abroad. That means people who were taken advantage of. These merchants were involved in all three sides of this triangular trade triangle. They bought cotton imported from the southern states of America. They provided finished cottons in exchange for African slaves. They also provided clothing for the enslaved workers on the plantations. So thinking about your triangular trade, if this is the USA, this is Europe, or in this case, England up here, this is Africa. This is saying these English merchants made big profits because they bought the cotton from the US, then they created and provide finished products that they exchanged for slaves, and then they created clothing for them to be as workers going there. All right, let's look at our chart. Okay, we're talking about cotton. Is this a primary or a secondary source? Look at the date it was created. This is a secondary. They might have used primary sources for this, but secondary sources were, this is a secondary source because of the information. It was not created at the time. It was created way after the fact. Who was involved? Which for merchants from where? England, merchants, or buyers. Who else is involved? Yep. Slaves used used as workers on plantations. We'll pause there. I'll give you a second to fill that out. Hold on one second. Okay, do we have those? Okay, so England and the merchants and the buyers, slave workers, but there's somebody else that we're missing in here. We have the workers,
America.
but who? We have the workers, and then we have England, who's buying a product.
The owners of the.
Yep. Plantation owners, the people that these guys work for. So what are our big products that are being traded here? Cotton. What else? Slaves. I would also say cloth or clothing that they used that cotton for. So who benefited in this situation? Okay, because they made money. Plantation owners made money selling cotton and other raw materials, but in this case, cotton. Who else benefited? Which merchants from where? Yep, good job, Shanti. England, and specifically those merchants. Because how? How did they benefit? Which they could. Yep. Bought cotton and used it to create a manufactured good to trade. To trade for what? Slaves. So yeah, maybe they bought this cotton, and yeah, maybe they produced a manufactured good from it, but then they used that manufactured good to go get more slaves to give to Americans so they could get more cotton. And probably this bought was probably for a low or reduced price. Probably there was a lot of trading involved. Hey, I'll give you some more slaves if you give me this cotton at a discounted or free price. Okay. So now you're going to be looking at some more of these secondary and primary sources. Secondary and primary sources. Questions? Yeah, can I move? Okay. You may work with one other partner or individually. You choose. Not 3 people, not 4 people. 1 or 2. So you can be a pair or you can work individually. We are going to spend the rest of today in this block and the next block doing this sheet, because you will use this to study for the quiz, which we have on Wednesday. You guys might have also noticed that one of the questions we played on the quizzes game talked about the indigo, the cotton, which products were used. Okay? All right, so I'm going to give you guys about 20 seconds to get set up. Remember, if you are moving around the room, you need to be airplane arms away.
4 minutos.